alphabetically by major type. This is the rhizomatous section of begonias, and there are 8 major types of begonias. You have rhizomatous, cane-like, which are your angel wing or dragon wing begonias. You have semperflorens or wax leaf, which are the kinds of begonias that you use in landscapes that most people see. Then you have thick-stemmed, which I have behind me right here. This is a thick-stemmed or tree-like begonia. Then you have shrub-like, trailing scandent, which they're trailing, tuberous, and then rex. And so that I can show you, this is the rex. This is the original rex that all other rex in the Rex cultorum are from. They have genetics from this plant in their DNA. Wow. And so while this is the only one that is the species version of that, the rest are all descended from Rex as a plant.
So all the Rex begonias that we see off in the plant shops, they're cultivated from this particular
This being
plant?
the very original, very first one.
That's the mother.
And the story, the kind of the mythology around it is that it came in with an orchid. I want to say in either the 17 or 1800s, and it was growing with an orchid that had been collected in the wild in China somewhere.
Wow.
And because these are from China originally, that's where they're native to. And so it got named, and Rex is Latin for king.
Wow.
So it's Begonia Rex.
And I heard that you could tell like where the particular begonia species originated from by the name.
A lot of them, yes. So any of the ones that have "ensis" in the last name, that's Latin for of a place. Mm-hmm. So you'll have Boliviensis, and that's one of the ones I think Don showed on Summer's video, is that it's of Bolivia or from Bolivia. And so any of those that say "ensis" are usually from a place. Wow. So part of what we do in this collection, because these are all species, and a species plant is one that occurs in this form in nature. And so these are not wild collected for the most part. These have been collected over time, and we've gotten them from begonia aficionados, people that are members of the Begonia Society, and they come in and we eventually got them. And so the history behind our collection is that we had a few ladies that were garden people, and they got together to learn how to grow begonias. And this was in the probably very late 60s, very early 70s, like 1970, not 1870, but they got together to learn how to grow begonias. And then they were from the Denton area in North Texas. And then they heard about the Botanic Garden having some begonias. And so they came down and they saw the begonias, and they said, wouldn't it be cool if they had a collection of begonias here? And so they were the beginnings of this collection. They started it, and they talked to our director at the time and said, hey, we would really like to have begonias here. And he said, yeah, by all means, we'd love to. But guess what? You guys have to help, because we don't have enough staff to be able to do this on our own. And so our collection here has been heavily driven by volunteer support. And that's how we do what we do. We have around a little over 400 species. We have over 400 terrarium begonias, and that gives us a grand total of a little over 800 in this house, named plants. In addition to unnamed plants on the far wall that you're looking at right now, on the far side against the wet wall, those are all unidentified, and they're assigned a number from ABS that says, hey, we don't know who this is yet, but it gets a number until a botanist or someone that's on that plant naming committee gets to say this is a particular plant.
So when it comes in as a U number, meaning that it doesn't have a name, is it because it haven't been identified in the wild, or what?
Possibly, yes. A lot of the U's that I think that look a lot like other plants are probably a hybrid or a natural hybrid that got collected somewhere, and then it slowly made its way to us. And so when it came to us, it was just, hey, we don't know who this is. A lot of times we can identify it right off the bat just based on its flower, and that's what we have to wait on. We have to wait on the flower to be able to do that. And so these, unfortunately, they have flowers, yes, but they also don't have a name, and so they still have a U. Like you see one, it's U605. We're already up in the 600s right now with the U numbers, and they started off like 01, U01.
Wow.
So
that many U's.
yes. Now, eventually the U's do get identified, and then they get named, and so they get pulled out. That's why you see that a lot of these are not sequential. With they're usually like, see, this says 646, and then it jumps to 660 over here, and that's because 697. That's because some of the plants have already been named, and they're not in this on the U tables anymore.
So when they get named, do they get cataloged as a
name? They have a name.
Okay.
So they'll have a name. And there are some that we still have labels on them that says it had a U on it before it got its name, and we'll keep that identification just as a reference for us here.
Okay.
But absolutely. As you see within the rhizomatous section, I'll talk about this. In this collection, we house about 15% of the world's threatened or endangered begonias. This is Hemsliana. This is the variegated form. There is a solid green form, but this is threatened in the wild or endangered because it has habitat loss.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. The habitat loss on this is due to humans. People destroy where it grows naturally, and it no longer has a home.
Humans encroaching on its habitat and building their own homes.
Either that, or they're making mines or farmland. They may want pasture land for their livestock. It could be any number of those things, but it's always humans that do it. But so these are all Heracleofolia. This is nigricans. This is Wakana, and this is Paramedilio. If I said it wrong, please forgive me. But I believe that's it. And I tell the difference on this. This one's easy because it's got the dark on it. That's what the nigricans is a reference to, the darkness on the leaf. The Wakana, if you look at the hairs or the trichomes on it, they're red. And when you cut it, that bleeds off onto your hand. It actually is a stain.
Wow.
And so I think native peoples in Mexico probably used that. They could have used it as a dye. Mm-hmm. And then this Paramedillia, if you look, it's all of the hairs are green. And so that's how I tell them apart. Whenever we have them and they're small and they all look the same.
That's a good way to identify them.
It's usually something in the morphology or the shape of the leaf or flower. That's how we identify, and that's a throwback to the old Linnaean form of taxonomy for naming plants. Linnaeus was a father of taxonomy for plants, and he came up with the two-name structure for naming plants. So these are all begonia, and then that secondary name. And one of the other things that you'll notice with the naming, the second name after the B stands for begonia. We abbreviate here just because we get tired of writing begonia on everything. The next name, this is Heracleofolia. You'll notice that the H is lowercase. That is a reference to it being a species. If it were a hybrid or cultivar, that H would be a capital H. Okay. And so that's another way that any normal lay person can tell the difference between a species or a hybrid. So if you look over here at Ulcinae, so we have these little bags on here. And so once we pollinate the species, we took a male flower and fertilized or pollinated a female flower, and then what develops behind is this seed packet right here.
Which is the male flower?
That is a really good question. I was going to ask you, how do you tell the difference between a male and female flower?
Well, normally the female flower has this, and the male flowers maybe. No, this is the female right here. Here's the ovary.
Right.
Here's the ovary.
Okay, I'm going to be less complicated. I'm going to say, look up their skirts. Okay.
Am I fine?
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. So if you look at the structure, So the male flower has 4 petals, or 2 petals, two tepals, and altogether they're referenced as sepals. But they have the pollen on the anthers out here. The female flower, if you look at her, she has her pistils there, and then behind she's got 5 sepals, or 3 petals, 2 tepals, and then behind her inferior ovary. And that's where the seeds develop. And so if you'll notice, the male does not have that, but the female does. And that's the easiest way that I look at it, is look for the ovary on the female flower. And so begonias, as a rule, and so this is botany, it's not rocket science, it's more complex. There are always exceptions to the rules. And so for begonias, they are monoecious, meaning they have male and female flowers on an individual plant. And monoecious is Latin for one house. So they have male and female flowers. A lot of times what you will see is you'll see clusters, and you'll see all the male clusters are open, and that's good because the females will come out second. Because the male flowers, it takes a little time for the male pollen to mature before it's ready to pollinate or fertilize the female flower and create the seeds. And so when the female flowers come out, the males are usually ready, the pollen is, and then it can pollinate, and then you get a successful pollination. So same thing. And then I don't know if you all can smell, but you smell the slight sulfur smell.
Yeah.
So that is, we use environmental or elemental sulfur in these burners, and it vaporizes these little prills. They're like little dots of waxy sulfur, and we do this at night because during this time of year, powdery mildew is a huge problem for begonias, and so we keep it under fair amount of control with that.
So begonia is a species that you do not want to get the leaves wet because they'll grow up. Sorry, I can't even get it out.
It's okay.
They produce mildew and mold.
They can, depends on
Like
the
squash
temperatures.
plants.
Yes, absolutely. And so what happens is, I'll show you this one right here. If you notice, it's kind of droopy and it's got this little bit of white to it. That's powdery mildew. And so I've sprayed, but the powdery mildew will continue to develop if I don't put these burners in.
Okay.
Because it likes that cooler night temperature, and it usually dips down into the 50s at night, and higher humidity. And so in the summers here, we're hot and dry. It can't grow. But the spores are there, and they're ready to activate as soon as the conditions are right.